One of true crime's most infamous cases has just been solved. 14-year-old Libby German and 13-year-old Abby Williams recorded video of their own killer. This case is widely known as the Delphi murders or the Snapchat murders, and as of yesterday, November 11th, 2024, it has officially been solved, although many are skeptical and potentially think that they might have gotten the wrong guy. Delphi, Indiana is a small town where nothing ever happened, with a population of less than 3,000 on February 13th, 2017. That day, best friends 14-year-old Libby and 13-year-old Abby had the day off from school and wanted to do something fun. So Libby asked her older sister if she would drop them off at their local hiking trail, most famous for this sketchy old rickety bridge that was once used as a train track that they called the High Bridge. Libby and Abby were dropped off around 1:40 that afternoon, and Libby's father were going to pick up the girls at the trail around 3:30, but the girls never showed up. When it was first realized that Libby and Abby were missing, no one expected the worst. This was a small town where nothing bad ever happened and everyone knew everyone. Libby and Abby's phones must have died. They must have gotten hurt or lost. The community came together and they searched the trails well into the night past midnight, but they found nothing. A massive search started early the next morning, Valentine's Day, 2017. By noon, one of Libby's shoes was found, and then some of the girls' clothing was found. And then a half mile from High Bridge, the bodies of 14-year-old Libby and 13-year-old Abby were found. They both had been murdered. And when investigators looked at Libby's Snapchat account and her phone, it showed something truly chilling. About 15 minutes after being dropped off, Libby posted a photo on her Snapchat story. It was black and white of the High Bridge. And then a few minutes later, she posted a photo of her friend Abby crossing the bridge. But the next thing that Libby recorded with her phone is equal parts terrifying and brave. In a video recorded on Libby's phone that has never been released to the public in its entirety, Libby and Abby talk about a man that is following them. And Libby, at only 14 years old, records a video of this man that is following them, their killer. And at some point in the video, one of the two girls says something about a G word. It has also been reported that at some point, Libby put her phone in her pocket while it was still recording and was able to capture her killer's voice, instructing the two girls to go down a hill. Snippets of the man and his voice were released to the public in hope of identifying him, but remember, these are only snippets of a much longer video that we will likely never see. The investigators kept almost all other information on this case sealed from the public, and to this day, it hasn't even been officially announced how Libby and Abby were killed. And despite this being a small town where everyone knew everyone, they were having a hard time identifying this man and solving this case. They had witnesses that were on the trail that day that believed they saw a bridge guy. They were getting thousands of tips. They released this sketch in 2017, shortly after the murders, who they believed they were looking for. They said this man was between the ages of 16 and 40 and was average height and weight. And 2 years later, in 2019, they released this sketch and said, based off witnesses, that this is the guy they were looking for, which was really, really confusing because the two sketches look nothing alike. This case had so much attention on it, there were so many leads, but it still went unsolved without an arrest for 6 years. And then in October of 2022, pretty much out of nowhere, an arrest was made. 50-year-old Delphi resident Richard Allen was charged with the murders. But still, so much information was being held from the public, but what we do know is that Richard Allen has been on the police's radar since the beginning of the case. Within a few days into the case, Richard Allen actually admitted to police that he was at the trails and on the bridge the day of the murders, said that he went there to go watch the fish. He described the clothes that he was wearing that day as a blue jacket, jeans, and a hat. He also denies seeing the two girls, but claims to have seen every other witness that saw a bridge guy. But their biggest piece of evidence was from a bullet that was found between Libby and Abby's bodies. And this was a bullet that reportedly came from a firearm that was registered to Richard Allen. It is important to note, though, that we later did find out, it was never officially released, but through court documents, that a firearm was not the weapon used in these murders, and actually a sharp weapon was used to cause the injuries that ended the lives of Libby and Abby. It has also been reported that Richard Allen has confessed to killing Libby and Abby at least 5 times twice to his mom and his wife of 30 years in prison phone calls. Although during his trial, he chose to plead not guilty. During Richard Allen's trial, no cameras were allowed, so everything we know from the trial has come from secondhand reports, which has been very, very frustrating. And there's a lot of people that believe that the police got it wrong, and they're kind of pinning this on Richard Allen just to try and solve the case. And people believe that he's innocent because there's no DNA evidence or forensic evidence that linked him to the murders. Also, witnesses that reported seeing the killer said that he was younger, had a boyish look, and other witnesses reported seeing someone who was average or taller in height, and Richard Allen is a shorter guy. He's about 5'4". But it is important to note that eyewitness reports have always been unreliable, but I totally understand people's frustration. This is such a big case, such a well-known case, and so many people want justice for Libby and Abby, and it's so frustrating that we don't know all the information and we don't know everything that the jury heard during the trial. But just yesterday, on November 11th, 2024, the jury came back with Richard Allen guilty of all charges, and he will be sentenced. Right now, they're saying he'll be sentenced in December. But still, there's people all over social media that are shocked that this came back with a guilty. They don't think that there's enough evidence that proves that Richard Allen is guilty, but I truly don't believe that we know all the information, and I do think in the next few weeks and months we'll learn more. The case is so heartbreaking to me. These two girls are so young, and I think they have gotten lost in their own case. These were two girls that had the day off from school, and instead of sitting inside all day, they wanted to go outside and go on this little hike, and their lives were brutally stolen from them. And it's very, very brave and heroic that these two girls, took the initiative, realized that something was wrong. This man following them scared them so much, and they took the initiative to not only take video of him, but also secretly record audio of him. I believe that more information will come out in the next few days, weeks, and months, so definitely follow me to keep you guys updated. Leave me all your thoughts on this case in the comments. Do you think Richard Allen is guilty? Do you think he's innocent? Do you think there's not enough information that at least we know? And while you guys are in the comments, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you guys tomorrow with another video. This 19-year-old killed his own father in an exorcism gone wrong. Looking at photos of Scott Callahan with his family, you would believe that they were any other happy, normal family. But below the surface, life for the married father of three was a lot darker. At some point, Scott Callahan experienced a traumatic brain injury that quite literally altered his brain chemistry. He was never the same. His behavior completely changed, and he was, for lack of better words, out of control. And he turned to substance and alcohol abuse. His wife divorced him, and his relationship with his three sons was rocky. Some even described his behavior at this time as belligerent and abusive. This was especially rough on Scott's youngest son, Jack, who had just graduated high school, and him and his father were always so close. In the summer of 2021, 57-year-old Scott Callahan was involuntarily admitted to a rehabilitation center. But sadly, before he was able to complete his treatment, his mother passed away. The rehab signed off on Scott leaving his treatment for one day so he'd be able to go to his mother's funeral in Boston, which was about an hour away from the rehab and an hour away from where Scott lived. After his mother's memorial, Scott did not want to attend a dinner event for the loved ones, which really upset his 19-year-old son, Jack, and they actually got in an argument over this, which ended in Scott going to the dinner, and afterwards he left, presumably to go back to rehab. So imagine the shock for Scott's sister when later in the evening she gets a call from the rehab saying that Scott never returned. It was pretty obvious to his loved ones that Scott was probably somewhere that wouldn't be helpful in his sobriety, but the only one that was interested in going out and looking for Scott was his 19-year-old son, Jack. And after hours of searching for his father, Jack found him in Boston, in a bar, wasted. I'm sure that Scott felt like he had to blow off some steam after his mother's funeral and the fight that he got in with his son, but he was really adamant that he would not be returning to rehab. He said to his son that he was going to be staying at this bar, and then when he was ready, he already had a hotel room booked in Boston. This was really frustrating for Jack. He actually called the hotel that his father booked a room at and canceled his father's room. He wanted his father to leave this bar and go home with him immediately. Witnesses at the bar said that the father and son argued a lot. They even caused the scene, and witnesses say that the son, Jack, was very stubborn and stern with his father, almost too controlling, kind of like This is what's gonna happen, end of story. And I can really empathize with Jack in this situation. I'm sure any of you who have an addict in your life can understand as well that sometimes being stern is your only option. Jack called an Uber to bring him and his father the hour drive back home and somehow was able to get his father in the Uber. But the issue here was that Jack lived with his mom, Scott's ex-wife. So by this time, it's a little after midnight on June 28th, 2021, and they're getting close to Jack's mom's house. So Jack calls his mom to try and explain the situation, and she tells him, absolutely do not bring my drunk ex-husband into my house. Now Jack has no idea what he's going to do with his father, and at the exact same time, the Uber driver actually was driving past this local park in their town that had this beautiful pond. So Jack tells the Uber driver to pull over. His father could sober up at this pond while Jack comes up with a plan on what to do next. But honestly, this is really confusing to me because reports say that Scott actually had his own house that was like pretty close to where Jack lived with his mom. So I'm really confused why he didn't just bring Scott to his own house. And then about an hour later at 1 a.m., Jack shows up at his mother's house alone. His mother said that her son was acting completely erratic, was soaking wet, and was saying that his father was missing. So out of concern, she called 911. When police got there, Jack was completely distraught. He was actually hyperventilating, and he told the police that he had no idea what happened because he blacked out. The last thing he remembers is getting out of the Uber with his dad, and then the next thing he remembered, he was just back home. When police arrived at the pond that Jack said that he last saw his dad at, they found 57-year-old Scott Callahan and all of his belongings floating in the pond. Scott was pronounced dead at the hospital. His autopsy showed additional head trauma, and his cause of death was listed as drowning, and his manner of death was listed as a homicide. And after being thoroughly interrogated, his son Jack cracked. He said that he lied, he did not black out, and he actually remembered everything. He said that after they left the Uber, his father became physical with him and began to repeatedly punch him in the face, and this at least seems true because he still had bruises on his face. But during this assault, he said that he saw a demon in his father's eyes, a literal demon. He truly believed that his father was possessed by a demon named Dirty Dan and that his father needed an exorcism. And this fight between the father and son ended with Scott in the pond. Jack felt like he needed to baptize the demon out of his father, so he dunked his father's head under the water. When he let his father back up, his father was thrashing and fighting back. And in Jack's mind, this was the demon fighting back. So he continuously dunked his father's head under the water over and over and over again until his father stopped moving. People have said that before this, Jack Callahan was a normal teenage boy. He was a sweet boy who never showed any signs of, mental illness or violence ever. During Jack's plea hearing, he cried and he pled not guilty. During Jack's trial, he was being charged with murder, but for whatever reason, the jury was not allowed to hear about his confession. So Jack's defense strategy was, since there was no witnesses, no evidence, and no confession, that they were going to say that he was not the one to kill Scott Callahan, his father. And the prosecution strategy was that not only was this a planned attack, it was obviously done by Jack because he was the last one to be with his father alive. After an 8-day trial and 25 hours of deliberation, the jury came back and actually acquitted Jack of murder, and they found him guilty of the lesser charge of involuntary manslaughter. And for this, Jack was sentenced to 4 to 6 years in prison at the age of 22 years old. I'm really interested to get your guys' takes on this case. Do you believe that this was a planned attack and 19-year-old Jack was some kind of evil mastermind? Or do you believe that he truly did see a demon in his father and truly thought that his father was possessed? And do you think that the 4 to 6 years in prison is a good enough sentence for the crime that this child committed against his own father? If you're interested in my thoughts, I don't think that this was a planned attack. I don't think that Jack set out in mind to go pick up his father with a bar with the plan of killing his father that night. But I also don't believe that Jack was seeing demons in his father and that he truly thought that his father was possessed. I think that Jack truly did care about his dad and wanted him to get better, but after years of his father's out of control, destructive behavior, possibly being abusive towards him and his family, I think that Jack was very frustrated, and I think that he snapped. And I think he killed his father. But let me know all of your guys' thoughts in the comments. While you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. And until then, I love you guys so much. And I will see you guys tomorrow with another video. This couple held their 13 children captive for most of their lives. The Turpin family House of Horrors is one of the craziest cases out there, and I feel like we don't talk about it enough. Also, if you haven't seen yet, I'm doing a big giveaway to say thank you to you guys. I'm giving away perfume, makeup, skincare, some of my all-time favorite products, a lot of like really viral products as well. If you want to find out how you can win my little beauty bundle, watch the video that's pinned on my profile. David and Louise Turpin were both raised really religious. When they met, David was 21 years old and Louise was only 14. Her parents obviously did not approve of this relationship because he's an adult and she's a child, so David essentially threatened her parents if they would not let them be together, that they would run away together and leave the state. So pretty much what he did was threaten to kidnap their daughter, because remember, he's an adult, she's 14. So her parents let them get married. She was 15, he was 22. Afterwards, she dropped out of high school, and then they had a bunch of children. Over the next 18 years, they had 12 children. 9 years after the 12th child was born, they had their 13th child. It was 10 girls, 3 boys, and for the entirety of these children's lives, they were imprisoned, abused, neglected. Think of the worst things you can imagine, then times it by 5. They did it all in the name of God. They thought that God wanted them to raise their children this way. All 13 children also all had names that started with the letter J, just like the Duggar family, another really terrible family. When the Turpins first started having children in the 90s, at first everything seemed pretty normal, but the more children they had, the less money they had. They were also both addicted to gambling. They were in a lot of debt, so they started to cut expenses for their children, but not themselves. But they also wouldn't cut the amount of children they were having. Everything was gradual. At first, the children's meals were cut down from 3 meals a day to 2 meals a day. They had to ask permission to eat, but they also had to ask permission to do literally everything. They were super neglected. They were forced to stay in their rooms 24/7, other than to go to the bathroom or go to school. But every single year, things would get progressively worse. And the school noticed that the children were always coming to school filthy, wearing dirty clothes, they hadn't bathed, they smelled bad. They sent a letter home to their parents pretty much saying, hey, you need to take care of your children. So their parents just pulled them out of school. So now the children are literally stuck inside their bedrooms all the time. At this point, they were also only being fed 1 meal a day. They were barely given any bathroom breaks. They lived in terrible conditions. The house was nasty. The children were also punished for literally everything. The punishments ranged from not getting your 1 meal of the day, to being chained to your bed for days, to being locked in a small cage in the basement. And when they were in the cage, they were not allowed to be given bathroom breaks. So you can just imagine what that small cage was like. David and Louise, the parents, had multiple nice outfits, but each of the child just had one filthy, disgusting outfit that they had to wear every single day and was never washed. At this point, the children's 1 meal a day was just 1 piece of bread with some peanut butter on it, or whatever scraps were left over from their parents' meals that their parents didn't finish. David and Louise would go on these nice trips, but their kids were forced to stay home. And if you're asking yourself, why didn't they just run away? Well, they didn't run away for multiple reasons. 1, they were brainwashed. 2, they were terrified. And 3, for a majority of the children, this life was all they knew. They just assumed that everybody lived this way. The oldest 2 children were tasked with taking care of the rest of the children. The oldest 2 children were just pretty much treated differently in general. I think they were possibly the most brainwashed, so they were given extra privileges. Like, for one thing, the older 2 children were given smartphones. They didn't have SIM cards, so they couldn't like make outward calls, but connected to the Wi-Fi, they could play like games, they could like download apps on them, which is crazy considering that the rest of the children weren't allowed to do anything. They weren't given toys, they weren't allowed to watch TV, literally they couldn't do anything. The entire family was completely cut off from family, friends, neighbors until like 2011, when David's brother wouldn't stop asking questions about like the children. So to shut him up, the entire family went to Disney. It was the first time in years that the children were given a bath. The thing about David and Louise is that they would always keep up appearances. They were really big, like posting on social media, like they had this big, beautiful, perfect, happy family. In October of 2017, 3 of the children, the youngest being only 7 years old, were caught stealing food because they were starving. And as a punishment, they were chained to their beds. On Christmas, 2 months later, the 3 children were released from their chains for the first time in 2 months so they could stand in silence and watch the rest of the family eat Christmas dinner before being put back in their chains. On Mother's Day 2017, the children were given their first bath since like Disney of 2011, so 6 years. clothes so they could pose for a photo for social media looking clean and happy. They were given like clean clothes to wear, but after the photo was taken, their clean clothes were taken from them and then they had to put their dirty, filthy clothes back on. Also in 2017, one of the older kids got a new cell phone, so they gave their older one to their sister, 17-year-old Jordan. Again, the phone couldn't make calls, but it had access to the internet through Wi-Fi, so Jordan downloaded social media apps and made a fake account using a fake name where she began talking to people outside of her house. And her online friends told her that her life is not normal. It's a crime. Especially when Jordan says that she has 3 siblings that have been chained to their beds for months. Her online friends told her that even though her phone didn't have a SIM card, it could still call 911. Her siblings had been chained to their beds for 1 year and 3 months. 17-year-old Jordan ran away from her house, ran down the street as far as she could until she couldn't see her house anymore, and she called 911. And when the police arrived to talk to Jordan, I don't think they fully understood the gravity of the situation. Jordan's 17 years old and she doesn't even understand what some basic words mean because she's been held captive her entire life.
Hi, Jordan. Hi, what's going on?
I just ran away from home.
Okay.
And I live in a family of 15.
Okay.
My 2 little sisters right now are chained up.
They're chained up?
Yes.
Where are they chained up at?
On the bed. Now, Mother didn't chain them up just to be me. Okay. They're chained up because they stole Mother's food. But I'm sorry if I talk too much. Okay. I've never talked to anybody out there, so I've never been alone with a person, so this is fair for me to talk. Okay.
How did your parents know you left your house?
No, they home.
Do you take any medication?
What's medication?
Medication?
Yeah, what's medication?
Do you take pills? Do you take pills?
Oh, I don't think I've ever taken a pill before.
Okay.
Right, I haven't. My parents are abusing. They abuse us. But the reason I called and the reason I managed to get out here, this is one of the most scariest things I've ever done. I'm terrified. But I called because my 2 little sisters are chained up right now.
You have pictures of your sisters chained up?
Yes, but they're here. Okay. I don't have proof of everything, but I have proof that my sisters are chained up. So see, those are the places that make it known that. And see how dirty she is? We're so filthy. We don't take baths. We don't.
How did your sisters get like this?
Okay.
Your parents chained them up?
Yes, because they stole food.
Okay.
But they stole it because they were hungry.
Who took this picture?
I did. I took those pictures.
Okay. You make sure to save these, okay?
Okay, I will.
Don't get rid of those.
I will. I won't.
Can you do me a favor, take a seat in the back of my car?
Okay.
Do you have any injuries?
What's injuries?
Are you hurt?
Oh, no, not right now.
What are your parents going to do when they find out you left?
They're going to want to literally kill me.
What's the worst thing they've done to you?
They have choked me against the bed and...
Did you call the police?
I didn't have to get home yet. This is... I can't back up. Oh, my brother should be helped.
They're chained up?
One of my brothers is chained up. So 3 people are chained up right now.
What does your mom do?
Nothing. She just stays at home. But she's always gone.
Well, why don't you guys just leave the house?
Because we're terrified. We don't really have a way. Everyone's always looking. There's always something.
The parents were arrested on 75 different crimes. The first responders said that the house was absolutely disgusting. There was this terrible odor coming from the house. They said that like abused animals were treated better than these children and living in a cleaner, nicer home. The children were all filthy and thin. The police actually thought that all the children were minors because of how tiny and malnourished they are, but they actually ranged, the 13 children ranged in ages from 2 years old to 29 years old. The neighbors had no idea that there were 13 children living next door. In the house, they also found a notebook where the parents kept track of their children's punishments, and it turns out if it wasn't for Jordan's bravery, her 3 siblings, remember the youngest was 7 years old, that were chained to their beds in October of 2016 would have been chained to their beds until Christmas of 2021. Just for taking some food because they were starving. All the children were severely malnourished. They had a long list of medical issues because of a lifetime of neglect and abuse. The 2 oldest daughters will never be able to get pregnant because they had lost function of their ovaries. The hospital that treated them said it was a miracle that they all survived. The 6 youngest children were divided into 2 foster homes, and all the children were given the choice to change their names. And the oldest children, who a lot of them were adults, remember the oldest was almost 30 years old, has been kept inside their house their entire lives, had no idea how to take care of themselves. So they were given help on how to learn like literally the most basic parts of just life. And their parents, David and Louise, pled guilty to all charges because in their words, they wanted to spare their children having to testify. Which is like obviously good. Like I'm happy the children didn't have to testify, but like don't act like you care. They claimed that when it came to how they cared and disciplined their children, they had good intentions and that they loved their children and they were all blessings. You can let me know what you think about that. This is an incredible story of survival. I don't think that in my 27 years of life, I've ever been a quarter as brave as Jordan was in that moment to get help for her siblings. I don't think that all of her siblings would have survived if it wasn't for her. I wish all of them a lifetime of happiness, and on the chance that any of them will see this video, please be nice in the comments. Please say only nice, encouraging things, please. Remember to check out the pinned video on my profile to learn more about the giveaway. Let me know all your thoughts on this case in the comment section below. Until then, I will see you guys next time in my next video. The time that someone killed 7 people with poisoned Tylenol and got away with it. On the morning of September 29th, 1982, 12-year-old Mary Kellerman woke up that morning feeling sick. Mary was her parents' only child, and they were unable to have more children, so her parents were very protective over 12-year-old Mary. They allowed their daughter to stay home from school and gave her some Tylenol for her symptoms, but within minutes of taking the medicine, 12-year-old Mary collapsed on the floor and began convulsing. By 10 a.m., the 12-year-old girl was dead. And on that exact same day, 6 other people in the Chicago area would die after taking Tylenol. 27-year-old Mary Reiner, who had just gotten home from the hospital after giving birth to her 4th baby. 31-year-old single mother Mary McFarland. 35-year-old Paula Prince. And 27-year-old Adam Janis, 25-year-old Stanley Janis, and 19-year-old Teresa Janis, the last 3 victims all coming from the same family. Married father of 2, Adam Janis, woke up that morning feeling kind of sick, so he stayed home from work and took some extra strength Tylenol, but within minutes collapsed on the floor. He was rushed to the hospital where he died of a suspected heart attack. His loved ones were shocked and devastated. He was only 27 years old, so all of his family members went back to his house to mourn and comfort his wife and his 2 children. Adam's younger brother Stanley and Stanley's new wife Teresa were both at the house, and they both had gotten headaches from crying so much. So they both decided to take some extra strength Tylenol that was still left out from when Adam had taken it that morning. And within minutes, they both collapsed on the floor, making it 3 deaths from the same family, all on the exact same day. But it was because 3 members of the same family all died after taking Tylenol that investigators were able to quickly link all of these suspicious deaths to Tylenol and likely saved more lives. The Tylenol had all been poisoned with a lethal amount of potassium cyanide, anywhere from 3 times to 1,000 times the lethal amount. Very quickly, news spread of poisoned medicine. There was mass panic. Police officers were driving through the streets of Chicago with loudspeakers, warning people to throw out their Tylenol. Poison control numbers were ringing off the hook, and emergency rooms throughout the entire country were packed of people suspecting they had been poisoned. Johnson & Johnson, who owns Tylenol, did a nationwide recall of the medicine, which costed the company over $100 million. The police and FBI were baffled how someone was able to poison all these pills because all of the victims had bought their Tylenol from different stores, and those stores all got their Tylenol from different factories, meaning that the one responsible had to buy the Tylenol from the stores, go home, lace it with a bunch of potassium cyanide, and then take those pill bottles and put them back on the shelves so the unsuspected victims would buy them. A week after the murders, Johnson & Johnson received a letter from a man claiming to be the one responsible and said that the deaths would end if Johnson & Johnson transferred $1 million to their bank account. The author of the letter was a man named James Lewis, and the bank account that he wanted the ransom sent to belonged to a man that Lewis felt owed his wife $511, meaning that James Lewis was trying to frame this man for 7 murders over a $500 debt. They decided to look more into this James Lewis guy, and honestly, he has quite a sketchy past. When he was 19 years old, he tried to kill his mom with an axe, and then when he was in his later adult years, he was suspected of killing this other guy, and honestly, he probably did it. The evidence was quite compelling, but he was acquitted on a technicality. He had recently moved to Chicago before the murders and was living under a fake name, trying to escape some fraud charges in another state. They never had enough evidence to charge him with the Chicago Tylenol murders, but he did spend 13 years in prison for extortion. But after his release from prison, he published a book about people being randomly poisoned that he just called Poison. He was never charged, but people believe that he is the most likely suspect. Another suspect is the Unabomber Ted Kaczynski, who killed 3 and injured over 20 by sending bombs through the mail. If you guys want me to cover the Unabomber in its own video, just let me know. The Unabomber's first victims were in Chicago, Chicago, and internet sleuths actually think that they've linked him to another death that happened 2 months before the Chicago murders, where a man named Jay Mitchell in Wyoming was killed after taking cyanide-laced Tylenol, possibly like a test run for the attack in Chicago. And there's Ronald Arnold, who's been linked to a couple of the victims, and he was in a bar shortly after the deaths, bragging about being the one responsible. The bar owner told the police about his suspicious comments, and in his house they found some weird crime manuals, some manuals on poison, and they also found some chemistry equipment, but never enough evidence to actually charge him. Suspiciously enough, Arnold was so upset about the bar owner turning him in for these suspicious comments he was making after the deaths that he returned to the bar at night and shot and killed a man that he thought was the bar owner, but it wasn't. It was just an innocent man, father of 3, a case of mistaken identity. Over the years, there's been a lot of suspects. Some actually theorize that the ones responsible were a Johnson & Johnson Tylenol competitor who wanted to tank the company, while others have theorized that maybe one of the 7 victims was the primary target and the other 6 victims were collateral damage. But despite being one of the most investigated crimes to ever happen in America, this case has still gone unsolved now for over 40 years. Really interested to hear what theory you guys think is the most likely. Is it one of the ones I've said, or do you guys have your own theory about what you think happened in Chicago in 1982? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments. While you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. Until then, I love you guys so much, and I will see you guys in the next video. A young girl boards a cruise ship with her family and then was never seen again. This is a very bizarre disappearance. It's very likely that she was sold into human trafficking, and this case is one of the main reasons why I have never been on a cruise ship. Amy Bradley was like any other 23-year-old girl before she vanished. In high school, she earned a varsity letter in 5 sports, ended up going to college on a full basketball scholarship, and amongst her other recognizable tattoos, she had a Tasmanian devil playing basketball on her left shoulder, and this will be very important, so remember it for later on. By 1998, she had graduated college, was about to get her master's degree, she had just gotten a new apartment, was about to start a new job, and was planning on adopting a new puppy. She truly had everything to live for. She was also very close with her mom, dad, and her younger brother. They were only 2 years apart, so they were more like best friends. In March of 1998, the entire Bradley family boarded a Royal Caribbean cruise ship. It was a vacation that Amy's father had won at work. It was a dream vacation that would soon become a living nightmare. On the second day of the vacation, the cruise ship docked in Aruba, and after a day of exploring the island, the entire family boarded back onto the ship. Amy and her brother ended up splitting up from their parents, and a waiter actually ended up approaching Amy's mother and asked her where her daughter was. And this was really strange because the entire family could notice that this particular waiter was kind of checking out Amy the entire time they were on this cruise. So Amy's mother asks, why? Why are you looking for my daughter? And the waiter just says, a couple of us guys were thinking about taking her off the ship and going to a club in Aruba. Later, Amy's mother actually ended up passing this message on to her daughter, and Amy just said, ew, they're creepy, I'm definitely not going anywhere with them. That night, the cruise left Aruba and was heading towards its next destination of Curacao. There was a band playing that night, and at this point, Amy's parents had already gone to bed, but Amy and her brother continued to party at the ship's onboard nightclub. And Amy was spending her evening hanging out and dancing with the band's bass player. He went by the nickname of Yellow. But by 3:40 a.m., Amy and her brother had returned to their family's cabin. They were sitting out on the balcony that was off of their room, just chatting about life. After a little bit, Amy's brother went to bed, but Amy stayed out on the balcony. And she was there until 5:30 in the morning. But by the time that her dad woke up at 6 a.m., Amy was gone. She had changed out of her clothes. She grabbed a couple of her belongings that she would take with her everywhere, but she hadn't taken a pair of shoes. So wherever she was, she thought she was coming right back because she was barefoot. Witnesses saw Amy that morning around 6 a.m. walking around the ship with that bass player Yellow. But by the time that her dad got up, realized that the daughter was gone, tried to search the ship for her, he couldn't find her anywhere. He ended up getting really frantic. He went and woke up the rest of his family. Together, they went and they spoke to the ship's security. They begged them to make an announcement over the intercom saying that Amy was missing. They asked to hand out photos of Amy so people could keep an eye out for her. But the ship's security refused because they said that it would worry and scare the other passengers. The only thing that the Royal Caribbean cruise ship did do was after Amy was already missing for 2 hours, they said over the intercom for Amy to go to the front desk, but of course she never showed up. Strangely enough, before that announcement was ever even made, while Amy's entire family was searching the ship for her, that bass player Yellow went up to Amy's brother and apologized about what happened to Amy, even though he shouldn't have even known that she was missing. At this point in the day, the ship had arrived in Curacao and the 2,500 passengers were allowed to depart the ship. Amy's family begged that no one be able to leave the ship until their daughter was found, but the Royal Caribbean cruise ship refused. The cruise ship didn't even make note on who was departing the ship, so if Amy had been kidnapped, they would easily be able to take her off the ship. Later in the evening, the ship was about to leave Curacao and head towards their next destination, and Amy's family had a decision to make. Either stay on the boat, look for their daughter on the boat and hope that she hadn't been taken off the boat yet, or stay in Curacao and search for their daughter there. The Royal Caribbean told Amy's family that they searched the entire ship thoroughly and Amy was definitely not aboard the ship. Even though we would later learn that this was a lie, they only searched the common areas of the ship and didn't check any of the passengers' rooms. So Amy's family got off the boat in Curacao believing that there was no chance that Amy was still on the boat, and the Royal Caribbean cruise ship left the entire family behind. Curacao authorities searched for Amy by sky and sea and there were no signs of her. So at this point, Amy's family got in touch with the FBI. The FBI and Amy's family both met up with the ship at its next destination, searched the ship, and again, there were no signs of her, but at this point, she had been missing for days. And shortly later, the week-long cruise was over, and the Bradley family had to return to Virginia with one of their family members still missing. It has been concluded that it's very unlikely that Amy fell overboard on the ship. At the point where she vanished, they were very close to land, and Amy was a very strong swimmer. She was a lifeguard and on the swim team in college and in high school. So if she had fallen overboard, she would have been able to swim to land, or her body would have washed up on shore. What most likely happened and believed by most authorities is that Amy Bradley was kidnapped from her cruise ship and then sold into human trafficking, and there's a lot of credible sightings of Amy Bradley that does support this. The day after Amy vanished, a cab driver in Curacao said that a woman that matched Amy's description came over to him very distraught and frantic, saying that she urgently needed a phone. 5 months after Amy vanished, a Canadian citizen was on a beach in Curacao, and he says that there was a woman and 2 men that were on the same beach. And the Canadian said that once the woman realized that he spoke English, she started to run towards him but was pulled away by the 2 men. This woman had tattoos that were identical to Amy Bradley's tattoos, and he specifically remembers the Tasmanian devil on her shoulder. 10 months after Amy vanished, a U.S. Navy officer was in Curacao, and he says that he saw a woman in a brothel who told him that her name was Amy Bradley and that she needed help, and explained that she was being held against her will. Unfortunately, this man left the brothel without Amy, and he didn't report the sighting immediately because he was afraid that he would get in trouble for being in a brothel. In 2005, a woman that was also on a cruise ship but was docked in Barbados went to a ladies' room in a shopping complex when a distraught woman rushed into the bathroom that was being followed by 3 men. The 3 men were yelling at the woman and threatening her about a deal that she better not mess up. The distraught woman said that her name was Amy, she was from Virginia, and she needed help, but before the other woman could help her, the 3 men took her away. But the witness was able to make composite sketches of the woman and the 3 men that were with her. In 2005, Amy's parents received an email, and it was an anonymous email that linked a website that advertised S-workers in the Caribbean. 2 photos on the website show an S-worker that is believed to be Amy Bradley. I have cropped the photos since the originals are slightly revealing, but this does further prove that Amy Bradley was likely sold into human trafficking. And in March of 2010, after being missing for 12 years, Amy Bradley was legally declared dead, but if she was still alive, she would be 49 years old. I've known about this case for almost 8 years, and the entire time I've always truly believed that Amy Bradley was kidnapped and sold into human trafficking and forced into S-work. I'm really interested to get your guys' takes on this case. If you guys are interested in the disappearance of Amy Bradley, I would really urge you to do your own research because there's so much in this case. I really hope that there's some interesting discussion in the comments. You guys are always theorizing things I would never put together in my own head, so definitely leave all your thoughts, theories, questions in the comments section, and while you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next, and until then, I love you guys so much, and I'll see you guys tomorrow with another case. The time an entire town got away with murder. In the small town of Skidmore, Missouri, with a population of a little over 400 people, one of its residents would be killed in the middle of the street in broad daylight with over 60 witnesses to the murder, but it would still go unsolved to this day. Ken Rex McElroy was born to a family of poor farmers. He dropped out of school in the 8th grade and was said to have never learned how to read. And after dropping out of school, he made a name for himself as the town bully and kind of the worst person ever. Ken started his life of crime with petty thievery and then escalated to extreme violence, essaying children, and attempted murder. Ken was said to have connections with the mob and had a really good mob lawyer, which was really good for Ken because he was arrested for multiple felonies every single year, but he would never see a day behind bars, either with the help of his really good fancy lawyer or by threatening the lives of witnesses so they wouldn't testify against him. And Ken was also apparently quite charming and somewhat good with women, but he did not like women. He liked teenage girls around 13 years old. Ken met his second wife when she was 15 years old and he was 24 years old. During an argument, Ken accidentally shot her in the chin and then was able to threaten her to drop the charges against him and marry him after that, and the two would have 4 children. Ken then began cheating on his 15-year-old bride with a 14-year-old girl and got her pregnant 3 times before she turned 17. Ken would actually have over a dozen children with multiple different women. And then when Ken was 37 years old, he met his third wife when she was only 12 years old, a girl named Trina McLeod. And when Trina was 14 years old, Ken got her pregnant for the first time, and shortly after giving birth, Trina attempted to escape Ken's abuse by taking her baby and running away to her parents' house. So what does Ken do? Ken goes to her parents' house, kills their dog, and then burns their house to the ground. When Ken was arrested, he was able to convince Trina's parents into not only dropping the charges against him, but to allow their 15-year-old daughter to marry the now 42-year-old Ken Rex McElroy. Like I said, the town that Ken lived in was a population of around 400 people, and pretty much everyone was a victim of Ken's at some point, one way or another, whether that was Ken threatening their lives, assaulting them, or robbing them. There was an instance where one day Ken was trespassing on the land of a local farmer. When that farmer tried to get Ken off of his land, Ken shot the farmer in the stomach and still never saw a day in jail. This man was terrorizing the small town and everyone was terrified of him, including the police. The local people felt abandoned by the police, and at the time it seemed like there was nothing they could do to stop Ken. That was, of course, until April 25th, 1980. That day, Ken's 8-year-old daughter was accused of stealing candy from the local general store. The local general store was owned by a 70-year-old man named Bo Bowenkamp and his wife. When Ken heard of this incident, he actually began to not only threaten, but stalk the elderly couple. And he continued to stalk and threaten the couple until July of that year, when Ken drove to the store and shot the 70-year-old Bo Bowenkamp in the neck at close range. Luckily, Bo Bowenkamp survived, and for the first time in Ken Rex McElroy's life, he was found guilty of a crime, but he was not convicted of attempted murder. He was convicted of the lesser crime of second-degree assault and was sentenced to only 2 years in prison, but was quickly released on bail attempting his appeal. And by the next day, Ken was back in the local bar with a firearm threatening the life of Bo Bowenkamp, and the town of Skidmore, Missouri had finally had enough. On the morning of July 10th, 1981, Ken was back at his local bar, and at the exact same time down the street, a town meeting was being held about what the heck are we gonna do about Ken. About 60 people were in attendance, including the town's mayor and sheriff. No one except those that were in the meeting know exactly what was said, but what we do know is the meeting ended with a group of 60 people heading towards their local bar in an almost mob-like fashion. At that exact same time, Ken was leaving the bar, heading towards his truck with a 6-pack of beer. And then there, on the main street of Skidmore, Missouri, in broad daylight with at least 60 people crowding around, Ken Rex McElroy was shot dead. No one came to his aid or called an ambulance. And despite there being at least 60 witnesses to the murder, when questioned by police, no one in the town saw anything. No one saw who shot Ken. No one in the town ever said anything to this day. The FBI even got involved, but no one was ever arrested for the murder of Ken. And to this day, the murder of Ken Rex McElroy is still unsolved. This is such an interesting and bizarre case of vigilante justice. I'm really interested to get your guys' take on this case and if you think murder is ever justified. Leave me all your thoughts in the comments, and while you're there, please let me know what case you want to see me cover next. I love you guys so much, and I'll see you guys tomorrow with another video.